Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hollander, Artistic Director and founder of Battery Dance, and I'm here with our Dance and Diplomacy interview. And I'm so delighted when we talk about dance and diplomacy that we have a dancer and we have a diplomat. So what could be more perfect? And also what could be more perfect than to look to our neighbors in the north, Canada. We've been so inspired by the dance culture coming from Canada. And we're also inspired by the fact that the Consulate General of Canada here in New York has been so supportive of dance and of the cross-border interaction between Canadians and Americans in the realm of dance. So let me start off by introducing my friend Khawar Nasim, who is the Acting Consul General of Canada in New York. Welcome, Khawar. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I can't think of a better way to spend my afternoon than with you and your lovely company. It's always a pleasure when I get to intersect with you. And reading about Alan, who I'm meeting for the first time, is exciting and exhilarating. And I'm usually an upbeat guy, but I'm particularly upbeat today because to share a platform with you two gentlemen is an honor.
Well, I'm so upbeat, I'm a little tongue-tied. So, let me see if I can get it straightened out. Khawar, we first worked with your consulate when we brought Citadel, a company, to the Battery Dance Festival from Toronto, and they were so superb. We had a really big crowd of about 2,000 people on the banks of the Hudson River, and we had this wonderful performance by a Canadian company dancing to Johnny Cash. So they were doing the dance diplomacy thing in action. And then, of course, we were able to kick off our North America program this summer with Alan and his fantastic group of dancers. And, when I think of Toronto and I think of Canada in general, I have to think about the multiculturalism of your country. And I have to just share a little anecdote, which is, I'm a big India fan. I've been working with India for so many years. And I think it was about 15 years ago, maybe 20, I opened the New Yorker magazine and there was an ad that said, visit Canada. And there was a picture of a dancer. And the dancer was an Indian classical dancer in full costume. And I thought to myself, this is really amazing. What a great statement for Canada, project its multiculturalism by using the Indian classical dance form. Alan knows there's some great Indian dancers or dancers who perform and teach Indian classical dance in Canada. So it wasn't that unlikely, but I mean, for me, it was very unlikely. So Khawar, tell us a little bit about the philosophy of cultural diplomacy as it's executed by your consulate.
So, yeah, I mean, where to start? Let me start, Jonathan, by saying that, culture is not an island in and of itself, and it is such a tremendous vehicle for us to tell our story of what is Canada. Words from me mean much less than when they're told through artistic expression and through the artists that we have. Canada, as you referred to in terms of its multicultural experience, in terms of its indigenous populations, in terms of the vibrancy of artists who come out of this experience and this sort of experimentation that we have, they are the best diplomats for us because they carry a message that we want to espouse to the world about inclusivity, about multiculturalism, about artistic expression, about freedom of expression. So, when we talk about gender or indigenous rights, or we talk about media freedom, the best people in the world to express that are our artists because they say it in a way that is simple and direct and leaves the interpretation to the individual. So we're so fortunate to have such a breadth and wealth of tremendous Canadian artists who carry the message for us. And we piggyback on them, quite frankly, Jonathan. We benefit from them. I look at it as not us supporting or us giving. This is us piggybacking on some tremendous artists who tell a great story for us. And so, about 3 years ago, we really ramped up our emergence in the cultural field here in New York. And we've done it not on our own, but in partnership with the great venues here, whether it's the Met or the Lincoln Center or Battery Dance or the BAM studio. We've been working with all of them to support not necessarily the big names, but some of the smaller artists who have been really, really great assets for us. So, we've got a team here, we're focused. We, like you, are suffering this pandemic and the impact it's had. I want to thank you, Jonathan, for picking up the ball, for injecting some creativity and innovation into this space by doing this activity and the others that you've been doing by sharing dance around the world. Anything we can do to work with you and your friends and colleagues to support the arts and culture writ large, but specifically when it pertains to Canada, is a great opportunity. So thank you so much, and thanks for introducing me to Alan.
Well, Alan's company was introduced to our festival for the first time this summer and got a rousing reaction. Who could not love this parade of beautiful dancers representing so many cultures? I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, Alan. But we also were so honored to have the National Ballet of Canada with their gratitude piece. It was fantastic. Yeah. So from ballet to contemporary to whatever, Alan, how can I even describe the piece that you brought to us, Alan? Why don't you share, we will share images of the piece with our audience here, but tell us about how it came about that you collected this wonderful group of dancers representing so many different styles. Is that something that you traditionally do in your company?
Yeah, so I'm co-artistic director of Kaeja Dance with my wife, Karen Kaeja. That's her dancing in the background there. And we have supported the totality of our community for 35 years in many different platforms and different ways. And because we both started festivals as well as programs that support our community. And in terms of exactly what Khawar was saying, in terms of the multiplicity of forms and of styles and approaches towards dance. So we've been invested in our community, I would say, for almost 40 years, and that we believe very strongly in uplifting the community. And so we have engaged and we do our best. We're always working at it, but we want to embrace all the different forms. So for this particular project, I also co-founded Can Asian Dance Festival, as well as Fringe Festival of Independent Dance Artists, things like that. So for this...
Well, don't just go over it so fast, because each one of those, I'm sure, was a major accomplishment.
Well, yeah, FIDA was Canada's largest international dance festival for over a decade.
See how humble dancers are, Khawar?
I thought it was Canadians who were humble, but I think Canadian dancers, and you've hit the home run, so that's great.
Thank you. But Karen and I conceived of this beautiful project called Extraordinary TO Dances, where we wanted to invite all the different extraordinary dancers that we have. I mean, we couldn't have them all because there's hundreds, but to perform, the initial project was to perform 1-minute solos on locations that were transformative for them in this city. And so we invited dance artists from, from all different communities, whether it's, Bharatanatyam or Kathak or Spanish or Indigenous, Santi Smith. We just wanted to make sure that we were as fairly represented as possible with our complete community. And so Karen and I sat down, spent many months inviting and talking to them, then going on location. And because of the nature of the grant that we had, I also had this opportunity to do the live stream. So all the dance artists chose locations. For example, Brian Solomon was in a tree, right? And that's part of his background and part of his joy when he first came to Toronto, his transformation. And so then...
Where did he come from?
Oh, he's Northern Ontario. and I'm so sorry. I don't
No, that's
remember.
okay. So he was coming from a different part of Canada to Toronto.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, same thing with Esmeralda. She's from Mexico. Rula Sayed, she's from Palestine. She's a refugee. So you know, we're connected with the whole community. Santi is from the Six Nations, so they're coming from all over the place, and so they had chosen all these. There's 22 dance artist locations throughout metropolitan Toronto, but the film that I did with you was me choosing a location and
Hmm.
bringing them all to my location. And I said, this is just one take. It was live streamed 3 years ago before live stream became such a big thing. And so I set up where they were in the space and set up the whole choreography of the camera. And so we traveled through this. The musicians were live. So all this took place at one sitting in one take. We had one walkthrough rehearsal and then we shot it.
I
And
was
that,
going to ask about the rehearsals because the whole thing is very seamless.
yes. Well, again, our DOP, our camera was Hernan Morris, who's a refugee from Chile, and he's brilliant. He worked with Moses Neimer and City TV for many years, setting up beautiful stage. So he was just brilliant. All I had to do was I just walked him through once. Dancers were there, and then we shot it. That was part of the risk that I wanted to take in this, was to do it as a one take. It was live feed. So
You
if there
can't
was a
go back.
mistake,
You can't say, let's take that again.
yeah. And then I invited Santi, if she wouldn't mind doing the land acknowledgement at the beginning of the
That was
film.
beautiful because
And
that we started that program, the North America program, with her and with you, and so it was a beautiful sort of centering experience, setting the
Mhm.
stage.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, and there's such a beautiful range of artists there, and we wanted to also support the multi-generational, so from the young generation in their 20s to dancers that were in there. Well, Mi Young Kim, Korean, she's 80, right? So to support the totality of our community.
See, I think what this speaks to, and I'd like, Khawar, to have you weigh in on this, is the role that the arts play in society, in education, in social change. We're living at a time where we all have to find what our role is. We know that we want change. We know that we want human evolution away from conflict towards harmony, towards mutual understanding. And just listening to Alan, it's so inspiring that you know a lot of contemporary artists are very hermetic in their practice. They go into their dance studio or they go into their art studio, and it's a communion between themselves and their material. But this is about coming out of that enclosed environment and really interacting with society. How do you feel about that, Kawar?
Listen, as you were speaking, Jonathan, I was thinking to myself that, what we often find ourselves in is a situation whereby we have so much good intention, so much good desire to communicate or to address or to find a solution. And our issues are how do we solve an issue, whether it's indigenous reconciliation or anti-racism or dealing with gender issues. We look for programs or training, but oftentimes it is fostering a debate, fostering discussion, elevating the people who are impacted by this. And I'm reminded of an occasion when I was previously in Minneapolis, and I was invited to go up to northern Minneapolis to meet with some throat singers who were performing, Canadian throat singers, at an exhibit. And I kind of said, "Oh gosh, I don't really know that this is my genre. I'm a contemporary. I like Rihanna and Drake, and maybe okay, I'll go." So I went along, and it was such an emotional experience, Jonathan Allen, because these women spoke of the generational impact of what happened in the schools, in indigenous groups. They spoke of this throat singing as a vocation, as a method to tell their stories to future generations. And so when we talk about art as a vehicle to address these issues, now we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our mission. And we're having these discussions within our own little bubble, and we're saying, well, how do we communicate that? How do we address it? How do we actually operationalize good intent? So over the past year, we've had artists like Kent Monkman, who is a tremendous Indigenous artist from Canada, and he came to the Met Museum. We worked with him. He was commissioned to do a piece which hung in their main hall, and he gave a speech to a packed house at the Met, for goodness sake. These are Canadians at the Met. It's so exhilarating to be a part of that. But he told a wonderful story about LGBT communities, about Indigenous populations. And so for us, that ability to support and contribute to those discussions. And now we're doing it on the diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. We want to find ways and means to support that message. And let me just say that it's easier to find and identify avenues within the cultural sphere than it is in, say, the sports sphere or the business community. It's not as natural. Within the artistic community, the artistic expression gives purchase and venue for those critical societal issues that we're all dealing with, whether it's anti-racism, gender, Indigenous. These are all issues that we really have a lot of bottled goodwill, and we need to find a way out. So listen, we embrace it. We try our best to not be pious or to be arrogant about it. We say, look, the best people to tell this story are artists. And I remember to share with you another story. I was doing a film presentation by a tremendous Indigenous woman named Alanis Obamsoin, and she has done 80 films, and she talks about Indigenous schools. And they said to me, well, Khawar, would you like to come up and be a part of the panel? And I said, well, no, I don't, because this is her story, not mine. I don't want to give you my position. I want her to tell the story. And so, as a venue for this, whether it's dance or poetry or visual art, they tell the story much better than we do. And I'm struck by the humility and decency of these artists in telling that story. It's not done with aggression or anger. It's done as with compassion and a real Canadian wholeheartedness. So anyway, anytime we can get behind it, we look and we seek it out, and we've done it with Indigenous musicians. We had an Indigenous DJ come down and perform at the Met on an evening when we had artists come down. We did a music showcase with the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Met Live Arts, and we had all of these folks from the Upper East Side dancing on stage, and we were very nervous about it, but it was tremendous fun. And so, look, it's the funnest part of my job.
Well, you were talking about humility, and I think your approach to being the acting consul general of Canada is refreshingly humble. And thank you for that. I think it's part of who you are, but also a demonstration to our audience that there's not a gaping hole between the arts community and the diplomatic community. I think at best, these are communities that can do their own work better in partnership with each other. Alan, I think that you have some reflections on that. I mean, your background as an artist is fascinating, with your research that you've done into your father's history and so forth, that dance does not have to only be about beauty, about abstraction, about geometry. It can be about the deepest experience of human beings. Do you want to go into that at all?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Khawar, when you were speaking, I was thinking about, wow, I'd love to address this. So thank you, Jonathan, as well. Is that, so my background, my father is a Holocaust survivor, and 99% of his family was murdered during the Holocaust. And he was married, and he had a child and his parents, siblings. aunts, uncles, like nieces and nephews, everyone perished. About 80% of his complete community that he grew up in. And so back in 1993, especially, it was Karen was pregnant with our oldest daughter, and something was overwhelming for me. And it was the first time. My father had passed away in 85, but I suddenly was overwhelmed with this need to start to express the experiences of my family. And so he emigrated in 48, and what their tragedies were, both prior to and during the Holocaust. And so I started in 93 with a friend of mine, Blake. We created a duet because my father's brother-in-law died in his arms in Auschwitz. So my father was in Auschwitz for 2 years in Buna. And then Karen, once Anaya was born, Karen said, Alan, I really want to work with you. Let's co-create a piece based on what was your father's first wife's experience having a child. And here we are holding our child. And so we created Sarah. And then it went on to Old Country. And then I created 2 trilogies. So over 7 years, I created 2 trilogies. Over 14 years, I created probably 15 works based on the Holocaust that have toured the world, both in film and on stage. And in fact, we brought one of my pieces, Resistance, through the Canadian embassy to Mexico because we were there representing Canada. But they wanted Resistance, which was crazy. It's a beautiful work, but really deep and disturbing at the same time.
Well, that goes to show that diplomats are not afraid of controversy or of stirring things up, and letting artists speak their truth and not putting a lid on it. I mean, I think that that's a very important message as well, that, you know, Battery Dance has worked with US embassies in 70 countries around the world, and I have never been told, don't say this, don't say that, and please make sure you say this other thing. Right. And I assume that that was the same with you in your experience in Mexico with the Canadian embassy.
Oh, 100%. In fact, they were the ones who insisted, excuse me, who insisted on the piece, because we had just finished doing it in Washington, D.C. and things like that. But what I would also venture to say is that for myself and as well for Karen, but growing up, you know, as a Jew in a community that was not very Jewish friendly, I grew up with a lot of discrimination and prejudice and things like that. And so when I came to Toronto, it was very important for me to fight for my community, whatever that meant, which is back in the 80s, of course, we were called, you know, it was called independents. We weren't a company, and independents back then were not treated well. So what did we do? We started a festival for independents, and then we sent our Canadian dance community all over the world. And it's still happening today. Like, it's amazing, the touring that's going on. So we just believe and feel that whatever we can do, and there's always more to do. It's not like we've achieved what our vision is, but we work really hard to give platforms and to allow our community to express itself as fully as it can in as many ways as it can, whether it's on stage or in film or in our community-based work. You know, it's just providing opportunities.
And that's beautiful kind of coming together of purpose, I would say. That and I think you're the artist of today. You're the artist who is not sequestered from what's going on around you politically, socially, educationally. And I think that, you know, Khawar, you mentioned we're in a pandemic, we're quarantined, the border is closed between Canada and the US. Is that currently the way things are?
So, I mean, I speak on this issue all the time. What I will say to you, Jonathan, and you know I love you, the border is not closed. What's happening is that the border is open to essential workers. It is open. So let me talk about narrative on this one, because the simple narrative is that the border is closed. In fact, the relationship between Canada and US is really exemplified in what we've done at the border. The border has continued to remain open for about 80 to 90% of the commerce that goes back and forth. These are critical things like PPE equipment and food. And we also have family reunification. So if you have family that is on one side, or if it's couples going back, we allow for that reunification. We also have great stories like Canadian healthcare workers who live in Canada and go work in cancer hospitals in Buffalo and in Plattsburgh. They go back and forth every day. We don't say you have to quarantine. We allow them because they're providing a critical service. We're trying to make accommodations to this. The pandemic is bigger than all of us, and we are asked to put certainty in an uncertain environment. The number one priority for our government is the health and safety, and the same thing goes in the United States. These are decisions that are taken jointly with our American counterparts, colleagues, to say we're not at a point where we can allow tourism or the back and forth that we would have, because the transmission is a risk, and we would hate to see that transmission happen. We examine it, we discuss it. We have people meeting every day in Washington and Ottawa to review it. But I really like to look at it from a different optic. It's not closure. That's not who we are in terms of Canada and the US. It is an example of, let's find a way to make this work as best we can. What are the accommodations we can do to make this work and allow for students who need to go and study in Canada from the United States and vice versa. We are making accommodations. We are trying very hard to work with our American friends on this. So,
well, as you said, I mean, all the countries in the world have to come together to, find a vaccine. And once the vaccine is there, make it available, to the population and so forth. I mean, it's a really, really difficult time for all of us.
And I was particularly proud of the fact that there was an editorial in the Washington Post in which the Canadian government, the Prime Minister, announced that we have signed on to a pact to call for the fair and equal distribution of an eventual vaccine to ensure that somebody's health and safety is not a function of their wealth or their status, but that we get, as equitably and as fairly as we can. So, these are important statements, and we're proud of that.
That's critical, and it's wonderful to hear. I mean, Alan and I both being part of the nonprofit arts community in our various countries, and being connected to people in other countries. The impact of this pandemic on the nonprofit arts sector, the performing arts sector, you can just imagine that, everything came to a halt, and people are actually suffering so much in terms of just basic human needs when they can't teach and they can't perform. So of course, Alan is an example of someone who has mastered the art of teaching online. My staff took part in Alan's workshop that was part of our festival. And one of the dancers said this was the best online workshop she ever had in dance. So Alan, thank you. I think you're showing the way towards excellence in this very difficult form of teaching dance online. Could you say anything about what it took for you to make that transition?
Yeah, I had a fantastic team with me. And when I started developing these workshops online, and a lot of the improvisational work that I've been doing has been developed by Karen and I over the decades. But with my team, I was able to then reimagine what that was. So suddenly I'm with you. Now, I don't know where I'm situated on the screen with each of you, but they helped immensely in terms of the technical aspects. How do we just bring two people up on screen? How do we send people to breakout rooms to begin to build relationships with each other? In fact, I also had some people saying that they felt that they were in the same space with the other individual, because we know how Zoom can just sort of distance you. And so my team, in all seriousness, having Drew and Mio and Aisha there was fantastic. And for myself, once I developed and designed the workshop, I then did, I would invite dancers and say, please come, just do this workshop. It's free for everyone. And I just want to practice to see if the mechanics work and then get feedback from them. So yeah, it was a process, because we started teaching in May online. And, and as you know, Jonathan, I've been teaching for many years.
Yeah.
And I love it. So to be able to reimagine all this on
Well,
Zoom.
congratulations. I mean, I think it's fantastic. I mean, Battery Dance, likewise, not Jonathan Hollander, but my team, Imad and Deborah, Alex, and our three fabulous interns, reimagined the Battery Dance message through dance, through teaching, through interviews, through performances. And on May 27th, March 27th, we began Battery Dance TV, which is where we are right now. And, you know, to me, it's a remarkable opportunity to bring the world together. I made a faux pas when I said closed border. I obviously stepped into a you know.
No,
But the fact is that we're all trying to find a way to open borders, you know,
Yes.
and where politics might have problems, sometimes country to country. I haven't ever seen that happen in the world of dance. And we've been to 70 countries around the world, and we've had so many numerous companies coming live to our festival or now in the virtual space. So, you know, there's a cliche that dance is the universal language, but we're practicing that, right, Alan?
Oh, 100%. I'd like to say one thing to support what Khawar was saying. And I don't want to be political per se, but I do have to say that I feel our government, our current government, has been fantastic. And they have done the best that they can do to support our community, especially the arts community, which has been devastated. And we have a government that's working really hard to provide for all of us. And we know, you know, especially the young dancers, it's very, very difficult for them and has been, but they have been supported for, you know, this past 6 months brilliantly.
That's fantastic to hear. You know, here in New York, they're just, you know, even at the best of times, there's too much supply and not enough demand, too much need for resources and shrinking space and shrinking dollars. So we are all trying to figure out who we are in this arena and just working every day. I mean, I think I've heard from a lot of people, and I don't know if it's true for the two of you, that there's been like a 24/7 work week happening here since the pandemic, because that you lose the sense of the 5-day work week, even if you never had it. And the 9 to 5 is like, doesn't exist. So having said that, I so appreciate the time that you've both given to us and to sharing your wonderful, radiant personalities with our audience and giving us insights into the art, the dance, and the diplomacy of Canada. So thank you so much. I can't wait for the time when Battery Dance and Kaeja Dance and all of us can be live together again.
100%.
Absolutely.
Jonathan, wonderful meeting you as well.
Lovely to meet you, Alan. I applaud what you're doing. It's so heartening to hear. And when you talked about the Holocaust survivors, I met Max Eisen, who is one of the longest living Holocaust survivors. He came to New York and we did an event with him and the launch of his book. And it was so heartening to be a part of it. You know, gentlemen, sometimes you get into conversations and you feel like I could go on talking with you for hours and hours and hours. But out of respect for your audience on Battery TV, I'll stop you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
To be continued.
To be continued. Thank you, and keep safe.